Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to The Post 3. Why happiness? The consequences of a feeling-driven life. But firstly, I need to say an incredible thank you to all of you. I've received thousands of messages and emails from you in response to the post 1. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be engaging with you once more and building what we've described as a thinking community. But it became clear very early on in these messages I have been receiving that many of you are in a pretty dark space. Hundreds of you, when you're writing to me, used words like despair, pointlessness, survival. So what's happening, I think, is you're looking back over the last 2 or 3 years and you're wondering what on earth happened, and indeed you're frightened what is going to happen next, and I absolutely understand that. And I'm going to try and address all sorts of these issues through the post, through this series. But I wanted to, right at the start, present something for a very special person, Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Lynn wrote me an incredible email. I'll just give you one sentence of what she said to me, quote, "She is mentally paralysed by the events in the world," end of quote. Now, at the end of reading Lynn's email, I sat and had a bit of a cry. But crying is not going to help us. So I wanted to help Lynn and show Lynn why all of this has happened, or some explanations of it, and that it's not about her. She didn't make mistakes and errors. She didn't cause any of this. So what I'm going to try to do in a quartet of vlogs that I think we might call the COVID quartet is four vlogs in particular, but I want to, in the first 3, present a lens for you. So what's going on, I'm just going to put in place a lens for your consideration about what has occurred. And you can discount it, you can agree with it, you can take some of it on board. It's just a lens for you to think about. So those 3 lenses will be, the first one that we're doing today, feeling and the happiness industry. The second one is deaths of despair. And our third lens will be claustropolitanism. And then I'm going to finish the quartet with a much more buoyant and optimistic vlog, a much more how-to guide to move on. And I'm calling that one, I think, Momentum Against the Odds. And I want to dedicate that one in particular to Ali. Big hi to Ali, my Sith Lord brother. Thank you for everything that you do. All the support that you give me, it is appreciated. And I probably should say we're in a very unusual location. And thank you for putting up with the last 2 vlogs in a pretty well-dodgy hotel with some very attractive furnishings not. Well, now for probably the next couple of months, Jamie and I are in another temporary location. We're living in a single room that is behind the camera with this remarkable vista in front of us. It's a temporary location. We're in a place called Ashurst, but I should say obviously it's a working farm. Obviously I'm not working on it because I am incompetent, but you know, you will hear all the farm noises, and there is a wonderful dog, a Labrador called Tika, who when he wakes up may come and say hello. But let's see if we can not wake him up. Now, I'm not presenting these ideas for you to agree with or disagree with. That's not the point. I'm presenting an argument for your consideration. And most importantly, I want to address Lynn's statement, Lynn's worry that she's done something wrong, that she made some errors in the last couple of years. So Lynn, what I want to do is provide a really innovative context around you so you see what has occurred, the history, your location, how you've been feeling. I want you to see that context in a different way. So let's understand the last couple of years and the environment in which all of us have been making decisions. I want us to understand our frame, understand our environment, and realise, actually, you know what? We did pretty well. We did pretty well. So I want to explore what's happened in a context beyond us, because I want us to move from me, what I think, what I feel, to we, and reconfigure a different type of community. And as always, as I'm going to try and do in the post, I want to introduce to you at least one remarkable scholar. And the scholar for this week is William Davies, who is a professor at Goldsmiths University in London. He is a sociologist, he's a political economist, but his areas of expertise are remarkable. Yes, he's investigating our environmental tragedy at the moment, but he's also exploring neoliberalism. And most importantly, what makes him distinctive, how I first read his work, is he investigates happiness. He also has a major interest in what he describes as anti-expertise politics. Now, this is fabulous. So he's trying to understand how people without any expertise of any kind think they have a right to comment and offer commentary about a series of issues. So William Davies, at its most basic, he's interested in that fascinating relationship between power and knowledge. Now, his role at Goldsmith, he's the co-director of the Interdisciplinary Political Economy Research Centre. He's also the convener for the PPE, so the Politics, Philosophy, Economics major at Goldsmiths. He has a BA from Cambridge, MA from Essex, and completed his PhD at Goldsmith in 2009. Now, his books have been unusual, and I do recommend them all to you. He's written 4. I'm using 2 of them today, but the full list are The Limits of Neoliberalism, that he published in 2014, The Happiness Industry, 2015, which was the first book I read of his. The third book was Nervous States, published in 2019, and my favourite title, I think, from 2020, This Is Not Normal. I know how he feels. But 2 of these books are the focus for my work today. I'm looking at The Happiness Industry, and its subtitle was How Government and Big Business Sold Us Well-Being. Absolutely tremendous subtitle. And the next book I'm using is, of course, Nervous States. And the subtitle of that book was Democracy and the Decline of Reason. But what's so amazing is as the book was reprinted, the subtitle changed. It still was Nervous States, but the subtitle became, wow, how feeling took over the world. How feeling took over the world. Now, so many of you have written to me saying, I feel really bad. I'm feeling angry, I'm frightened all the time, I'm confused all the time. I just don't know what's happening. So therefore, for this first instalment of the COVID Quartet, let's try and address some of those challenges and worries, what you are feeling. So Professor Davies described the challenge of our time as feelings have overtaken the world. He argues that our media, and indeed our entire context, is not reporting facts or indeed hooking into reality in any form. Instead, it's expressing emotion and sharing those emotions in public. Now, we've all used cliches and heard the cliches of fake news, believe the science, but Davies argues that the media are not reporting facts, but, quote, synchronizing attention and emotion over the viewing public, end of quote. So all these questions we ask, like why the anti-vaxxers, right? Why anti-climate change? Why is this happening? And the answer that Davies offers us is that there is currently no leadership. There is no authoritative position anymore. So without that knowledgeable and believable leadership, rumours, gossip and emotion fill out the narrative. So speed becomes more important than accuracy, and feeling is more important than interpretation. So although Davies does not use Paul Virilio, I sort of argue he probably should have, and I recommend Paul Virilio to you, because Virilio argued that that which is fast dominates that which is slow. That's going to become important in a second, because if emotions travel at speed, the very nature of the speed gives them importance and urgency and weight, if you will, weight. Davies also argues that our lives, human lives in the last century, have been founded on two binaries, on mind-body and war-peace. And he's argued what's occurred in the last few years, and indeed through the last 100, but particularly in the last decade or so, is those binary oppositions have started to crumble. So this means, remember, war-peace, conflict starts to jut into our daily lives, and we have to negotiate at speed this hypersensate environment. And remember, this hypersensate environment is being delivered digitally. So we experience pleasure and pain digitally rather than through our bodies. So because of digitisation, we exist in this immersive environment, a continual wash of images. So we lose the time and the capacity to be able to interpret ideas. Now, those of you that know something about my work know that I invented a concept in 2008 called the Google effect. And I argued is what's occurring is all these images and ideas are coming to us at speed and they're being granted an equal value. So that means, you know, an Instagram influencer's post is of equal value to a tweet, of equal value to a scholarly monograph, of equal value to a governmental policy. So it's a flattening of information, the Google effect. So my argument is we therefore need to summon my 2013 book title, Digital Dieting. Reduce down our digital engagement to create that space for interpretation. Now, Davies does something very clever. He argues that public policy construction requires the building of consensus. This is brilliant. So this means, what does that consensus look like? Public policy. Well, it means we have experts, and experts do their research on their field of expertise, and that expertise then informs, frames, shapes and develops public policy. Okay, but now with information everywhere, expertise and experts are sort of washed out of the mix, and we also don't have the peace and the space and the time to reflect and interpret. So in a post-fact age, emotion becomes more important than reason. Ooh, yeah. So that is why we had Donald Trump, Brexit. That's why we have a war in Ukraine, because, inverted commas, decisions are being based not on expertise in public policy, but on nostalgia, resentment, anger, and of course, fear. So more facts are not going to correct this situation. Expertise and the interpretation of those facts are all we've got to change this situation. And there's one other thread I need to add from Davies that again is very powerful and may just change your life. He makes a crucial point about inequality and why inequalities have been heightened during these really complicated times. You see, the public policy environment of expertise and consensus required that most of the population, most of the time, was sort of involved, engaged with these big ideas, right? But now that emotion rather than expertise is the policy driver, the very, very poor and the very, very rich that are increasing in number are lost from visibility. And political parties are focused on the centre-right and the centre-left, and they're negotiating through very, very small topics and very, very small ideas, wedge politics, if you will. Now, of course, there's a profound intellectual heritage for this conversation. Hobbes in the 17th century affirmed through many of his remarkable pieces of writing that when people are frightened, when people do not feel safe, then emotions come to the fore rather than understanding the actual reality of their lives. So when feelings are at the forefront, people, citizens, will act strangely, chaotically, independently, to get themselves safe. Okay, so think about January 6, 2020 in the United States. Think about that, how was it described? The Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, in Canada, and of course only a month ago that very odd public demonstration and occupation in Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, these were not rational, considered events, but they were incredibly meaningful and important. They're showing us actually as scholars, as policy makers, but also as citizens, that we've lost the people. We've lost the public debate. We've lost the public good. We've lost consensus. So whenever you ask yourself, why are people behaving in this way? Why are they having fights over toilet paper in supermarkets? Why are they damaging public spaces that they actually enjoy? And it is because they feel unsafe. Now, that feeling may not be accurate, but actually the accuracy doesn't matter. Understanding and contextualizing the feeling does. And that's why I worry a lot, and I rarely use phrases like culture war or cancel culture or summoning the metaphors of war and the military in our daily lives, because that's just increasing this sense of us all feeling unsafe. So research has shown that we need slow and careful engagement with ideas to summon interpretation and rationality. But of course, we live in fast and indeed chaotic times. The political system that we live in right now involves politicians on the right and left working the energy of the crowd, not through policy discussions, but through enthusiasms and also fear. These movements exist on the left and the right. So all the focus is on feelings, fears, needs, all delivered at speed and weaponized by social media. Now, Davies asked a question. I got very emotional when I read it, and even when I speak the quote, I get quite emotional. Davies asked, quote, "What do we do with a feeling of physical vulnerability?" End of quote. What a question. What do we do with the feeling of physical vulnerability? And of course, we're living that on a daily basis post the pandemic. So when so many of you wrote to me from around the world, right at the start of rebooting this series of vlogs, with phrases like, Tara, I'm stuck, I'm frightened, I just do not understand what has happened. So as you can see, I hope, this is not about you. This is about a failure of public policy. And this is a failure of information literacy. We've become lost. And we've lost our capacity to interpret, to weigh and to measure because of the speed of the delivery of information. And of course, many of these problems that we're living with economically and socially can be dated right back to 2007 and 2008, when governments around the world bailed out the banks as part of the global financial crisis. There were governments on the left and the right. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, public debt doubled between 2007 and 2011. That had nothing to do with Brexit and nothing to do with COVID. And this means there was then, 2007, 2011, less money for public health, public education, public libraries. So we're living with the consequences of bleeding out public organisations to keep those private banks operational. So this means we've got a disconnection now, and I'm not sure how we heal it, between the urban and the rural, between health and illness, and of course graduates from a university and those who have not graduated from a university. And we'll come back there in this vlog series. Now, Davies realised, quote, people who are drawn to nationalists such as Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen have often significantly lower health prospects and life expectancy than average. End of quote. So what Davies did is he studied diabetes in Michigan, physical activity levels in Pennsylvania, and heavy drinking levels in Wisconsin. Now, he's not suggesting, and again, it would be foolish to suggest, that there's a causality between health issues and behaviours and voting patterns. Those of us that have studied voting patterns know it's a very, very complicated field. But I think we are starting to reveal the consequences of education and location, and the consequences of education and location on health, on illness, and on sickness. Now, we're going to explore more of that next week when we investigate Case and Deaton's remarkable work around the phrase deaths of despair. Oh yeah. But at its most basic, Davies asks us to think about what he describes as, quote, the politics of pain, end of quote, and, quote, who deserves compassion and how much, end of quote. So this suffering traps us into a past, and it is a past of trauma. And it makes it harder and harder and harder to manage emotional responses each day. So what happens is, when people sit in suffering, it is uncomfortable. So all of us try and get out of suffering by thinking about what's caused this pain, what's caused this suffering. And of course, what happens is we scapegoat that pain onto others. And those others may be men or women, Indigenous communities, communities of colour, citizens with a disability or impairment, the trans community. All of us at different times can be weaponised as scapegoats. And this is because of the speed of information that's coming towards us. You see, knowing the facts and thinking about the facts takes time. But what happens is we don't have that time. So in the space immediately floods conspiracy theorists and trolls. And these trolls enter this online space. So, for example, whenever anyone dies at the moment, have you noticed on Twitter, someone immediately enters the space and said, I bet they were triply vaxxed. Now, every death that happens at the moment is supposedly linked with a vaccination, whereas I think we all know that the vaccinations that we've taken through COVID have been probably the safest in medical history, the most tested in terms of methodology and epistemology. But of course, those facts and truths about research and research protocols don't actually matter, because the speed, the tweet, bet they've been triply vaxxed, has urgency, and the speed gives it power. So I want to finish this vlog off, this disturbing vlog, but I hope there's something here that may give you solace. But I want to finish the vlog off by thinking about happiness and indeed the happiness industry. Now, I don't want any of us to live in constant fear, but it's also clear that if any of us live in constant happiness, that also has its own problems. So in 2015, Davies produced a book, that's 3 years before Nervous States. He wrote that book, The Happiness Industry, how government and big business sold us well-being. Oh yeah. So that's another great title that has punched us in the throat. And he starts by asking, how could any of us be against happiness? But then he shows us how happiness is privatised, how all of us are stressed, miserable, wondering what the point of life actually is, and particularly the point of work. And this point of work is made even more damaging and serious because we've got this digital 24/7 workplace, ping, 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 endlessly calling us to work. So instead of us thinking about and addressing the unreal expectations for us in the contemporary workplace, we focus on buying happiness through the happiness industry. So think about what we do to medicate ourselves. Lush bath bombs. Who knew that was a thing? Essential oils, yoga, meditation, and yes, I'm going to use the phrase self-care. So what Davies confirms, and hang on to yourself, is unhappiness and depression are concentrated in unequal societies. So the cultures that are highly materialistic. So I want a car, I want a good car, I want another car, I want a house, I want stuff, I want more stuff, I want so much stuff that it doesn't fit my house, then I have to buy a new house. You know those people? And also a highly competitive environment. You know those people, I will beat you, I'll pummel you, and then I'll push you into the car park, and I'll continue to fight, and then I'll fight with your kids, and then I'll fight with your wife, because I will win. You know those people. Now, those people actually have the highest level of unhappiness, because instead of searching for balance and fairness in work, communication with our families, building meaningful friendships, we turn all of this search for meaning outward to buy stuff. And that's why, if you think about it, workplaces at the moment are terribly focused on phrases like employee engagement, right? Because our corporations need us to plug in, to work hard, in fact, to work beyond hard, to work 24/7. These corporations, though, therefore, need us well so that we can work these impossibly long days. But by prioritising wellness, they've actually had to privatise wellness. So instead of paying for these wellness programs, they've privatised it to say, oh yes, well, it's important that you enact self-care. The problem is, through the privatisation of self-care, these corporations are not getting the results they want. And all sorts of new modes of resistance are emerging in the workplace. Not like the Luddites throwing their shoes into the machinery, but apathy. Scrolling through Instagram, pretending to be at work. You know, absenteeism, chronic health problems. So with this type of resistance in place, which is new, how can work be extracted? And of course the answer is put everybody on precariat, casual, temporary working hours. So if you don't do the work, you can simply be sacked. You're not even on a contract. But also businesses are continually critiquing governments, and that was very clear, I think, during COVID, you know, the economic versus health concerns. Why was it a versus, right? But of course, business needs to critique government and be suspicious of public health and public education and public libraries. And the reason you have to have that binary of big business and government is because governments regulate. Governments regulate to suggest that perhaps working people to death is not a good idea. But instead of taking that critique, we're all locked into this neoliberal system of incredibly high rents and therefore also incredibly high homeless levels, but also people desperately trying to buy a house and never managing it, and endlessly living on credit card debt. And of course, the bit that upsets me the most, because of these conditions, so many of us, all of us at different points in our lives, have to continue working for organisations that are hurting us, with the only salve to that hurt being the privatisation of care. Fitbits and iWatches, yoga, meditation, my personal favourite, wellness retreats. Yeah, right. Depressing, eh? So whenever we hear the phrase human capital, we could get cross, but actually, you know what? There's sort of some honesty to the phrase human capital. Everything, including us as humans, have a cost and a benefit. The problem is, though, that when we have a crisis, like a COVID, like a war, crises intensify. Crises never create anything, but they intensify the tendencies of our life. So the pandemic did not invent injustice in the workplace. It didn't invent the great resignation of 2021, but it intensified the reality that we are all nothing but human capital. And our worth is only as workers, what we can produce, rather than as humans, who we are. And David Harvey, the legendary David Harvey, realised that the tensions between all these competing demands can actually be productive, because moments like crises allow us to have that moment of consciousness, to realise, as David Harvey has argued, we're actually never going to be free. Our freedoms will always involve what Harvey described as, quote, engaging with the dark arts of domination, end of quote. But in this tough time, I hope, it's allowed us to think deeply about work. Not pseudo busy work, not emails, not meetings, not agendas, not minutes, but what is work? And how do we gain meaning from work? And further, how do we separate work from leisure? Rediscover leisure. Call it leisure. And then we start to create spaces that are not timed, but instead just hold meaning. So this is our first lens to help you think about what exactly has happened in the last few years. Lynn, I hope it's helping. And I hope what it has meant is we have survived. We have survived. Millions didn't. And that survival is important. But what we have to do now is make that survival meaningful. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.